Your stress isn't in your mind. It's in your breath. And there is a very specific difference between those two things. A mind under stress needs time, distance, sometimes a whole day off to settle. A breath under stress can be corrected in the next 60 seconds, without leaving the room you're sitting in right now. 1 method. 4 counts in, 7 counts held, 8 counts out. It sounds almost too simple to be real, and that simplicity is exactly why most people dismiss it before they ever actually try it properly, which is also exactly why almost everyone who dismisses it has been doing it wrong. Stay with me until the final section, because that's the part that determines whether this becomes something you use once out of curiosity or something your nervous system starts relying on for the rest of your life. Without it, you'll try this tonight, feel something, and forget about it by Thursday. With it, this becomes as automatic as reaching for water when you're thirsty. But first, the part that's going to surprise you most has nothing to do with the counting at all. It's about your mouth, specifically, what you're doing with it during the exhale, and it takes about 8 seconds to get right. 8 seconds, and getting it wrong is the single biggest reason people try this technique and feel almost nothing. Let's begin. Most of us think about stress the wrong way. We treat it as something that has to be managed from the top down, think calmer thoughts, distract yourself, wait for the feeling to pass on its own. We fight stress in the mind, using the mind, which is a little like trying to put out a fire using the smoke. Japan has long approached this from the opposite direction, bottom up, through the body first. There is a concept behind this called kokyu, breath, treated in traditional Japanese practice not as an unconscious background process but as something deliberately trainable, central to disciplines from Zen meditation to martial arts, where breath control is taught before almost anything else. And there is a broader idea, chinmaku, the cultivated value of stillness and quiet, which treats a settled breath as the doorway to a settled mind, rather than the other way around. The 4-7-8 method sits squarely inside this tradition of breath-first regulation, a deceptively simple pattern with a physiological mechanism behind it precise enough that its effects show up on a heart rate monitor within the first minute. Let's go through exactly how it works, exactly how to do it correctly, and exactly why almost everyone who's ever tried it once and given up was missing one specific piece. Here's the reframe you need before anything else makes sense. You've probably heard that deep breathing helps you relax as a piece of general wellness advice, the kind of thing that gets repeated so often it stops meaning anything specific. It is not vague. It is one of the most direct physiological levers available to you, and here's exactly why. Your autonomic nervous system runs on 2 competing branches, sympathetic, the fight or flight activation system, and parasympathetic, the rest and digest recovery system. Almost every stress response you've ever felt is your sympathetic branch running the show: elevated heart rate, shallow chest breathing, muscle tension, a mind that won't stop scanning for the next problem. Here's the part most people don't know. The parasympathetic branch is activated directly by the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve is uniquely sensitive to one specific input you have conscious control over: the length and pattern of your exhale. A slow, extended exhale, longer than the inhale that preceded it, directly stimulates the vagus nerve, which in turn slows heart rate and signals the entire nervous system to shift out of sympathetic activation. This isn't a metaphor for calming down. It's a measurable, mechanical switch, and research on vagal stimulation through breath has recorded heart rate variability changes within the first 60 to 90 seconds of a slow exhale breathing pattern, which is precisely the timeframe this method claims to work in, and precisely why that claim isn't an exaggeration. The shift: you don't have to calm your mind down to calm your body down. You can calm your body down directly, through your exhale specifically, and your mind will follow, because it was never actually leading in the first place. That's part 1. Now, part 2 is where the specific numbers, 4, 7, 8, stop being arbitrary and start making sense. Most breathing advice stops at breathe slowly and deeply, which is true but incomplete enough to be almost useless in the moment you actually need it. The 4-7-8 pattern is specific for a reason, and understanding why makes it dramatically easier to do correctly under real stress instead of only in a calm room while practicing. Here's the breakdown. Inhale through the nose for a count of 4, long enough to fill the lungs without straining, short enough that it doesn't itself become effortful. Hold for a count of 7, this is the part almost everyone rushes, and it's doing more work than either the inhale or the exhale, because a sustained breath hold allows carbon dioxide to build slightly in the bloodstream, and mild CO2 buildup is itself associated with a calming, parasympathetic-leaning physiological state, somewhat counterintuitively. Then exhale through the mouth for a count of 8, nearly double the inhale, which is the deliberate asymmetry that maximizes the vagal stimulation described in part 1. The exhale isn't just longer for the sake of symmetry with the number 8. It's longer because a longer exhale relative to the inhale is the specific variable that determines how strongly the vagus nerve gets activated. This is the mechanism that separates 4-7-8 from just taking a few deep breaths. A few deep breaths, done with roughly equal inhale and exhale length, barely touches the vagal response this method is built around. The ratio is the technique. Without it, you're just breathing a little slower, which helps a little. With it, you're deliberately engineering the exact input your nervous system is most sensitive to. The shift, the difference between a few deep breaths and 4-7-8 specifically isn't a matter of degree. It's the difference between vaguely relaxing and precisely triggering a documented physiological switch, and the only thing separating them is counting to the right numbers instead of just breathing slowly in general. That's part 2. Now, part 3, the detail about your mouth I mentioned at the very beginning. Stay right here, because this is the single most common reason people try this and feel almost nothing. Slow down here, because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking the entrance and exit of the breath, nose versus mouth, can't possibly be as important as the counting itself. Here's what it's actually doing, and why getting this wrong is the number one reason people report feeling nothing the first time they try this method. Nasal breathing on the inhale does two specific things a mouth inhale doesn't. First, it naturally slows and filters airflow, making it physically harder to rush the 4-count inhale. The nose functions almost like a built-in pacing mechanism your mouth doesn't provide. Second, and more importantly for the exhale that follows, exhaling through a slightly pursed mouth, not a wide-open mouth, but a controlled, narrow opening, sometimes described as blowing out gently through pursed lips, creates a small amount of back pressure in the airway. That back pressure is what allows you to control and extend the exhale evenly across the full 8-count, rather than emptying your lungs in the first 2 or 3 counts and then just holding an empty chest for the rest of the count, which is what happens to almost everyone the first time they try this without knowing about the pursed mouth detail. Here's the compounding problem with getting this wrong. If your exhale actually empties in 3 seconds instead of 8, you're not doing an extended, vagus-stimulating exhale at all, you're doing a normal exhale followed by 5 seconds of just sitting there with empty lungs, which does not produce the same physiological effect and is precisely why so many people try this once, feel underwhelmed, and never try it again. They weren't doing the technique wrong in spirit. They were missing one 8-second detail that changes the entire mechanism. The shift, the difference between a shapeless exhale and a controlled, pursed mouth exhale paced evenly across 8 full counts is the difference between mostly wasting the technique and actually triggering the response it's built around, and it costs you nothing extra to fix. It's not a new step. It's doing the existing step correctly. That's part 3. Now, part 4, and this is about exactly when this method works best, because timing changes what it can actually do for you. There's a common misconception that breathing techniques are meant to be a rescue tool for the worst moments of panic or overwhelm, something you reach for once things have already spiraled. This method works best used earlier than that, and understanding why changes how effective it feels. Here's the mechanism. The earlier in a stress response you intervene, the less sympathetic activation the parasympathetic system has to counteract. A racing heart at the very first signs of tension, a tight jaw, a shallow breath you just noticed, a stressful email you just read, is a much smaller physiological event to reverse than the same racing heart 20 minutes into an unmanaged spiral, where cortisol and adrenaline have already built to a much higher baseline. For rounds of 4-7-8, done the moment you notice the first physical sign of stress, can fully reset that early stage activation in close to the 60 seconds this method is known for. The same 4 rounds, attempted in the middle of a full anxiety spike, will still help, but expecting the same 60-second result at that later stage sets up an unfair comparison that makes the technique seem less effective than it actually is. This is also why practicing the method when you're not stressed at all matters more than most people assume. A technique your body already knows well, practiced calmly a few times a day, becomes something you can execute correctly under real stress without having to think through each step, versus trying to learn the ratio, the nose-mouth detail, and the pacing for the very first time in the middle of an actual stressful moment, when your working memory is already compromised by the same stress you're trying to fix. The shift: this method isn't just a panic button tool for your worst moments. Used early, at the first physical sign of tension, it's a full reset in under a minute. Used only as a last resort during a full spiral, it still helps, just not nearly as dramatically, which is the exact reason so many people underestimate what this technique is actually capable of. That's part 4. Now, part 5, and this addresses the most common mistake people make once they've got the ratio and the nose-mouth detail right. Once people get the technique right, there's a second common error, either stopping after a single round because it doesn't feel dramatic enough yet, or the opposite, doing round after round for several minutes, assuming more must be better. Here's why 4 rounds specifically. A single round, 1 inhale, 1 hold, 1 exhale, is roughly 19 seconds. That's not enough time for heart rate variability to meaningfully shift. It's barely a taste of the mechanism, and stopping there is exactly why some people report feeling nothing at all. 4 rounds brings the total to just over a minute, which is where research on breath-based vagal activation has generally found the earliest measurable heart rate and subjective calm effects begin to show up clearly. On the other end, extended sessions of many rounds in a row, particularly for beginners, can occasionally produce lightheadedness, a result of the breath hold portion accumulating a larger CO2 shift than a beginner's system is accustomed to. This isn't dangerous, but it's uncomfortable enough that it can make someone quit the practice altogether, associating the technique with dizziness rather than calm. 4 rounds is the sweet spot that reliably produces the effect without approaching that discomfort threshold for most people. The shift: the goal isn't to breathe this way for as long as possible. It's 4 rounds, roughly 60 to 70 seconds total, done correctly, which is short enough to do anywhere, in the middle of a meeting, in a parked car, at your desk, without anyone around you even noticing. That's part 5. Now, part 6, and this is where we address the one situation where this specific method needs a small adjustment. Some people, particularly beginners or anyone with certain respiratory sensitivities, find the 7 count hold genuinely uncomfortable rather than just unfamiliar. This is where most people give up on the technique entirely, assuming it simply isn't for them. Here's the more useful approach. The specific numbers 4, 7, and 8 matter less than the ratio between them, roughly a 1 to 1.75 to 2 relationship between inhale, hold, and exhale. A beginner can use a 2-3.5-4 pattern, or simply 4-5-6, preserving the same proportional emphasis on a longer hold and an even longer exhale, while making the total breath more comfortable to sustain. As comfort and lung capacity build with regular practice, the ratio can extend back toward the full 4-7-8 over a period of days or weeks. The shift, the numbers 4, 7, and 8 are a specific, well-tested version of the ratio, not a rigid requirement that locks out anyone who finds the full count uncomfortable at first. Preserve the proportions, adjust the scale, and the mechanism still works. That's part 6. Now, the final part, the one I told you at the very beginning, determines whether this becomes something you actually keep using. This last part isn't about the breathing technique itself at all. It's about the reason most people who learn a genuinely effective tool like this one still stop using it within a couple of weeks. Here's what happens without this final piece. Most people plan to use this when I'm stressed, which sounds reasonable, but relies on remembering a technique correctly in the exact moment your working memory and impulse control are most compromised by stress itself. That's an unreliable trigger. It works sometimes. It gets forgotten just as often, precisely when it would help the most. The more durable approach, consistent with the broader Japanese emphasis on small, repeated daily practice rather than occasional intense effort, is to anchor 4 rounds of 4-7-8 to an existing daily habit that happens whether or not you're stressed, right after brushing your teeth in the morning, right before you start your car, right when you sit down at your desk. Practiced this way, twice a day, independent of your stress level, 2 things happen. First, the technique itself becomes more physically comfortable and effective with repetition, the same way any skill improves with practice. Second, and this is the part that actually changes your life rather than just helping you occasionally, your nervous system starts to associate the pattern itself with a calm state, so that even reaching for it under real stress becomes closer to automatic muscle memory than a technique you have to consciously recall and execute correctly under pressure. The shift: you don't need to remember to use this technique in your worst moments. You need to use it twice a day in your ordinary moments, attached to something you already do without thinking, and by the time an actual stressful moment arrives, your body will already know exactly what to do, without your mind having to manage a single step of it. That's the final part. Here's everything in one breath, quite literally. Inhale through the nose for 4 counts. Hold for 7. Exhale through pursed lips for 8, evenly, not all at once. 4 rounds total, roughly 60 to 70 seconds. Use it at the very first sign of tension, not only in the middle of a full spiral. Adjust the ratio proportionally if the full count feels like too much at first. And anchor it to something you already do twice a day, so it's already automatic by the time you actually need it. One method. No equipment. No app. No cost. It works in the exact chair or car seat you're sitting in right now, in under 60 seconds, using nothing but the breath you're already taking anyway. Your stress isn't something you have to think your way out of. It's something you can breathe your way out of, directly, using a mechanism your nervous system has been running this whole time, you just never had the exact instructions for it. Now you do. So here's what I want from you before you close this video. Try it right now. 4 counts in through your nose. 7 counts held. 8 counts out through pursed lips. 4 rounds. Then tell me in the comments what you actually noticed. Was it your heart rate slowing down, your shoulders dropping, or honestly, did you feel almost nothing the first time because you rushed the exhale? Tell me exactly what happened in the comments right now, because naming what you felt is how you'll actually remember to use this the next time you need it, and someone reading your comment might try it themselves for the very first time because of what you wrote. If this changed how you think about stress, send it to the one person you know who's always saying they can't calm down. They're 60 seconds and one correct exhale away from a completely different nervous system response than the one they've been stuck in. I'll see you in the next one.